So I was in Charlotte catching a plane, and I like a bar out there. It is 1857 or something. So I sat there. There was another Indian guy, Indian looking, who came and sat next to me. So we got talking, all right. And he started showing me his photo. He had just come back from a European trip or something. And then he showed me the photo, and there was a middle-aged woman there, his wife, okay. And he was like, oh, we went to Croatia. Look at that. And look at my wife. She's so beautiful. And there are people, most people are average looking. Some people are good looking, and some people are particularly not good looking. Okay.
Right there.
So I was like, okay, he thinks his wife is good. I think she was particularly not good looking. So he keeps on, having things, keeps on telling me. And finally, it was the 10th photo, I think. The Greek islands with the white, the cliffs and the white houses and all that stuff. Everybody knows that's beautiful. And she was there spotting the scenery. So I just asked him, I said, just out of curiosity, how do you define beauty? Like, I just want to know, is it like 9 out of 10 people should look at something and say it's beautiful? He finished his drink and he actually shouted, he said, beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder, and walked away. And then later on, when I was catching my flight, he was sitting there, he was still staring at me. It was very uncomfortable. So people look at the same evidence. Here's an unaltered photo of a middle-aged woman, okay, from a normal camera, and come to absolutely different conclusions. So you have already made up your mind that that woman is beautiful. That's the conclusion of your study. You're showing me the evidence, and you are saying, say, she's beautiful, right? And there you disagree. Same evidence, same numbers, absolutely different conclusions, because people take out from a study what they want to take out from a study. They have basically already made up their mind about a certain thing. And that's what they see in the numbers. And somebody else with a totally different philosophy will see something else in the numbers. Okay? So I like things like weight and height and all that stuff. Yes, you can argue about inches and centimeters, but these are measurable stuff. And what I try to do when I'm going through studies is actually look at the numbers and just state them out as they are without making opinions on them. Anyways, from the last, we know that, we talked about the fact that different people have different blood pressures, minimum blood pressures, mean arterial pressures that they need to have perfusion of vital organs. And once you have decided on the blood pressure, all we do in critical care is that we deliver oxygen to tissues. And then we know that the delivery of oxygen to tissues depends on hemoglobin, saturation, stroke volume, and heart rate. Then we decided that stroke volume depends on a preload, ejection fraction, and afterload. And the last lecture was all about how do you manage preload. Just to revise from the last one, you know that, sorry, can I add a drawing? I can. Hold on. So you know that your arterial oxygen, okay, is equal to the atmospheric pressure, which is 149 minus, in this place, Salisbury, minus the pressure of the water vapor, which is around 47 into, sorry, what am I talking about? 7, what is the normal? 760 minus 47 into FiO2, which is 0.21. And from that, you minus 1.2 into PaCO2, which is 40. So this becomes 713 into 0.21 minus 48, which becomes 149 minus 48. So it becomes 101. And then you know that the AA gradient is 10. So your PaO2 is around 90. That's your normal. And therefore, oxygenation is always difficult because the diffusion gradient is small. On the other hand, your PaCO2 is somewhere around 40, 35 to 45, and out it comes in your end tidal, again, somewhere around 40. And the reason is that in the atmosphere, despite global warming and all that stuff, it's actually only 0.3 millimeter of mercury is the partial pressure of CO2. So it diffuses out, okay, without any problem. Therefore, when we were discussing about the different reasons why people are hypoxemic, when you have low ambient oxygen, you climb to 30,000 feet in your plane and the pressure gives off. The AA gradient is normal, but the oxygen is low because there is low oxygen in the atmosphere. And you try to overcompensate by increasing your cardiac output and your ventilation. And so the CO2 actually goes down until you start dying on Everest. And then the CO2 goes up just before you die because you can't ventilate anymore. In a shunt physiology, oxygen goes down first, carbon dioxide does not, because it diffuses fast, 200 times fast. And so you have an increased AA gradient, and you have a decreased oxygen, and carbon dioxide becomes a problem later on. In dead space, same thing, AA gradient is going to be high. The oxygen is low, the carbon dioxide is high. Why is that? In COPD exacerbation or when you are overventilating somebody, is because the ventilation is so much more than the circulation that the CO2, although it has a diffusing pressure, does not come in contact with the alveolar gas. So here CO2 rises early. With diffusion, it's the same thing. Oxygen falls down first, CO2 falls down when your interstitial lung disease is really, really advanced, and so on and so forth. We have gone through this. This is not the topic of my discussion today. With a ventilator, if you are going to manage oxygen, the only two buttons that you can manage is FiO2 and PEEP. And then we had also talked about the fact that FiO2 can only go up to 100%, and the PEEP, you increase it, you might get an oxygen benefit, but for every human being X in a condition Y, there will be a PEEP after which you are getting no oxygen benefit because you start decreasing the circulation, causing over distension, and so on and so on. So this is the revision from what we have already done. Now I'll talk about ventilation basics. The next lecture is all about mode of ventilation and what to do at the bedside. But in today's topic, I'm going to talk about what is the science behind why we do certain things with the ventilator. So the first study that looked at this subject, how do I get rid of this? I guess it's here to stay, huh? Okay. Was a study in 1998. The first time that somebody said that, we have a lot of animal studies and a lot of observation studies saying that maybe the way we are ventilating people is actually causing harm. That means that when we ventilate people with the tidal volumes they were using and the ways they were doing it, that it is actually causing the ARDS to worsen. And this was moderate to severe ARDS patients. Everybody had a Swan-Ganz. Everybody's PCWP had to be less than 16 so that they are not in heart failure. This study was a randomized controlled study done in 2 ICUs in Brazil. And the reason they stopped at 53 patients is because by the time they reached patient 30, they realized that they were having such a big mortality difference that it would be unethical to continue the study. So after 30, every 5 patients, block of 5 patients, they would reevaluate and reevaluate and reevaluate. And when they found a statistical difference in 28-day mortality, they said no more. We are not doing, we are going to go to this new way. Because of that, there was no difference in survival to discharge. but the 28-day survival mortality went down from 71% to 38. It was huge. What did they actually study? They had a period of randomization while the randomization was going on, where everybody had a tidal volume control ventilation with a tidal volume of 10 ml per kg. It was a square waveform. That means a continuous flow of 50 liters per minute on a certain time to give you your 10 ml per kg actual body weight. 10 ml per kg actual body weight. And because this study was in Brazil, maybe the actual body weight was ideal body weight. I don't know. Respiratory rate of 15, 100% FiO2. Everybody was on PEEP of 5, but you were allowed to increase the PEEP if needed to keep your PO2 around. Everybody got fentanyl. Fentanyl drip, everybody was on it. Midazolam as needed, paralytics as needed. Everybody was on dopamine 5 mics, maybe from the River et al. Study, plus Levophed if needed to keep MAP greater than 60. This was there for everybody. Now in protective ventilation, they put people on a tidal volume of 6 ml per kg actual body weight, and they could only use pressure support or pressure control to do that. The other guys were on a tidal volume of 12 ml per kg actual body weight. In the protective ventilation, the PEEP was set at a lower inflection point +2. I will tell you what that is. And if the FiO2 was greater than 50%, you could make the I/E ratio 1:1 or even 2:1. In a conventional ventilation, much like what we were doing when I was a kid, PEEP titrated to maintain oxygen saturation. That means that you increase the PEEP, and if the oxygen saturation increases, that's great, you increase more. If it goes the other way, you come down. These guys said we will do permissive hypercapnia up to a PCO2 of 80. We won't bother about carbon dioxide at all because this is the first time that somebody was trying a low tidal volume ventilation in a randomized controlled trial. And if pH was less than 7.2, you could do bicarbonate. The driving pressure had to be less than 20, the respiratory rate less than 30. In the conventional ventilation, they were gunning for normal PCO2, and there was a total disregard of airway pressure. I don't care what your airway pressure is, 12 ml per kg, normal CO2. But the respiratory rate, using sedation and paralytics if needed, they wanted to keep it pretty normal, 10 to 24 times a day. Okay.
Overhead system. 1, 2, 3, 4.
What is driving pressure?
If
If you are on a volume control, when a ventilator is triggered either by the patient or just by the rate, you have an influx of air, and then that pressure that you get is a combination of your lung mechanics and also the ET tube and the other tube resistance and air delivery. If you hold that breath after expiration for about 0.5 seconds, you get a pressure. There is no air going in, so resistance comes out, and that pressure is your plateau pressure, which depends on the volume I'm giving you and the lung compliance that you have. And then as you exhale, you come back down to PEEP, which is end expiratory pressure. Why would they use pressure control? Because one of the problems with any kind of ARDS or lung protective ventilation implementation is that if you really look at ICUs, only 30% of the time does the respiratory therapist know exactly what is the plateau pressure of my patient, because you got to measure it. Except in pressure control, what happens? You initiate a breath or you get a timed breath and you get a pressure, a set pressure for a set amount of time. The peak pressure and plateau pressure is the same. So if you are on a pressure control ventilation, I always know what your plateau pressure is because it is equivalent to the peak pressure. And in that time, the patient can generate a tidal volume, can generate a flow, depending on however they want to use that pressure for that time. Okay. So they use pressure control ventilation. Now, what they didn't know at that time, because this is a 1999 study, it came just after. Can anybody tell me why they chose a PEEP of 5? Why would people be on a PEEP of 5? Do you have a PEEP right now?
Isn't that what your physiologic?
Huh?
Isn't that what the physiologic pressure is?
Yeah, how much is the physiologic PEEP? 1 to 2 centimeter H2O. If you didn't have a physiologic PEEP, you would not have a residual capacity. You would empty your lungs completely. Okay, so you do have a physiological PEEP. But there were indications from animal studies, rat studies and all that stuff, that if you have a control rat, okay, and the other rat gets medium volume, tidal volume and a high PEEP, they produce inflammation. If they have a medium tidal volume and 0 PEEP, the inflammation is more. If they have a high tidal volume and 0 PEEP, the inflammation is the most. So the thinking is that there will come, okay. If I put somebody on a tube, by definition, because the tube is fitting in the trachea, it is smaller than the trachea and therefore will have increased resistance. Okay, you are breathing through a straw. You are having to pull air through a straw. Except that if you have a 9, 9.5 or a 10 tube, you have to realize that the trachea has tracheal rings and therefore the flow is not laminar, whereas your tube has a laminar flow. And it is possible that if you are on a 9 or 9.5 ET tube, your breathing is actually easier than normal. And that is why when we are weaning people, for example, in this study, they use pressure support to wean, because if you have a ET tube of 7 or 7.5, you would need a pressure support of 7 to 8 just to overcome the resistance. If I'm giving you a pressure support of 0, I'm making you work harder than you should, and you'll fail your weaning trial. But the opposite is also true. You see, the resistance that depends on length and radius is not only going in, but also while coming out. So if I put you on a ET tube and don't attach you on the ventilator, you are not only working to suck in, but you're also working to push out. And therefore, some ventilators, for some time, it was a sexy thing to have automatic tube compensation, where during exhalation, it would be a negative pressure to get the air out. But you could also use PEEP, like the COPD patients. You see, I have problem taking air out, so I do pursed lip breathing. What am I trying to do? Air comes out from the center, but from the side, it's turbulent, and I'm creating an auto PEEP, because if there is a pressure of 5 needed to drive air through, but I make a pressure of 5 here, the pressure will be equal and air will come out easily. Okay, that is why we use a PEEP of 5 in people and not anything less than that. Okay. What else are we trying to do with PEEP? We have talked about it earlier. In your mind, you will put PEEP and some of the lung which is de-recruited will get recruited. Other ones will stay open and the top one won't get distended. But in reality, you'll reach a point where some lung is so unrecruitable that it won't open. Then you have this mid zone where you keep it open and then you over distend what is on top. Okay, so PEEP has a limit in every person and in every condition that the person might be in. So by using a pressure volume curve, what they want to do is that you see as air comes in your lungs, okay, the volume does not increase, the pressure increases, and like a wet balloon, it suddenly opens up, and then after some time, it is very difficult to put air in again. This lower inflection point is where compliance starts increasing, and the upper inflection point, deflection point, is where over-distension of the whole lung starts to happen. The reason we don't use that now is because there was a guy who joined our, a smart guy, basically wanted to tell me that we should be using the pressure volume curve for PEEP. And like, it's so easy to do. I said, okay, fine, show me. So he put the ventilator on that screen where you see the compliance curve. And basically that compliance curve did a loop-de-loop, something like that. Because people don't realize that in order to generate the compliance curve, you have to be paralyzed or sedated. You have to be in sync with the vent, volume control, and constant flow. And this patient happened to be on PRVC, which is not volume control, it is pressure regulated volume control. So it is difficult to measure. And the second thing is, some people would say, this is an inspiratory curve and PEEP is an expiratory pressure. So why are you setting the PEEP on an inspiratory curve? But anyway, more on that later. Because people do realize that there is a inhalation curve and there is an exhalation curve. And in the exhalation curve, de-recruitment starts happening at a much higher pressure than this pressure. Okay. So PEEP is to open up your lungs, but also to keep them open. And maybe the PEEP should be set here, which is where the higher PEEP that we'll discuss will come along. But I just wanted to go into the mind of these people who were doing the study. Why were they doing what they are doing? Why worry about respiratory rate? You worry about respiratory rate because of a phenomena called atelectasia, which happens because of the inflammation of cyclic opening and closure of diseased alveoli. So for example, if a patient has a pH of 7.2 at a rate of 25, I say, no, I don't like it. I want normal numbers because I want to kill my patient. So 7.3, I make the rate 35. You see what happens is patient A, 25 breaths per minute, takes 36,000 breaths in a day. And patient B, 35 breaths per minute, is taking 50,400 breaths a day. And you just added 14,400 breaths a day for a difference of 0.1 pH. So that is why they wanted to control the rate. So now that we have understood, why would they want to do an inverse ratio ventilation to keep the FiO2 50%? Like if it is more than 50%, go to inverse ratio. That is because many studies, including in the OR, mechanisms of atelectasis in the perioperative period, have suggested, it's not a proof, it's a suggestion, that if your FiO2 is more than 60%, then you have reabsorption atelectasis because there is no nitrogen left to balance you out. And so the diffusion pressure is so different that all air comes out of the alveoli and they crunch on. And then we know that, if you have too much oxygen, there are suggestions, it's very controversial, that you have more oxygen radical species and what you call inflammation and vasoconstriction and so on and so forth. Why would they say the PCO2 of 80? Why was that okay? What does increased carbon dioxide do for you? Now, in animals and in healthy volunteers, again, not RCTs, it seems that increased carbon dioxide increases your cerebral blood flow. That is why the neurosurgeons don't want to do that. Increases your cardiac output by causing vasodilatation. It improves myocardial ischemia and tissue hypoperfusion because it shifts the oxygen dissociation curve to the right. And it protects you from oxygen-free radicals. But on the other hand, so if carbon dioxide is good for me, what's wrong? Why would I say 80? Why not 120? The reason is, and why bicarbonate for the pH? The reason they did that is because if you have too much acidosis, then you have pulmonary hypertension and you have increased reactive species inflammation and so on and so forth. So they said 80 and 7.2. That's why they did the study the way they did. What did we find? In the PEEP group, they had said put PEEP to the lower inflection point plus 2. And if you can't figure that out, make it 16. And that is so difficult to figure out that there you go. Everybody had a PEEP of 16. In the conventional ventilation, do what you can for oxygenation. The PEEP was 6.9 to 9.3, much lower than that. The plateau pressure in protective ventilation, 31, 30, 23. And in the conventional ventilation, 34, 36, and 37 as the day goes on. Today, I can tell you that because of protective ventilation, the ARDS was actually improving, their compliance was improving, their plateau pressure decreased. And on the other hand, if you do 12 cc per kg of actual body weight, your ARDS just keeps getting worse, and therefore your plateau pressure keeps going up. Tidal volume 362, much like we do today, versus 763, much like anesthesia still does today. But ventilation 7, so they could keep PCO2 like pervasive hypercapnia with a low ventilation. In conventional ventilation, not because of the rate but because of the volume, the ventilation was 12 to 13 per minute. PaCO2 not very high, 58 and 35. pH 7.19, 7.37, and so on and so forth. And these were sick patients because look at the PO2, FiO2 in the control period, 112, 134, they were sick patients. So what did we find out? This was the big difference in mortality. Big difference in mortality. And barotrauma, 7% versus 42%. At that time, barotrauma meant pneumothorax and stuff like that. Okay, good. Now these guys say in their that we did so many things that we don't know which worked because we did pervasive hypercapnia, we did a high amount of PEEP, we did a low tidal volume, we kept the plateau pressure low, we kept the driving pressure low. They did some statistics and they said that higher PEEP values and the lower driving pressures were the only ones that were independently associated. That means that they thought that the lower tidal volume gives you lower plateau pressure, gives you lower driving pressure, and that's why you get better. All right. When I read this study, I was like at that time, because I have been modifying this since 2005. So some of these are slides from that time. Moderate to severe ARDS patients require higher PEEP. How much? I don't know. Higher. 16? I don't know. Maybe 16. Lower driving pressures and lower plateau pressure saves life. Hypercarbia might not be harmful. Keep respiratory rate low because, never thought of that before. Keep it low. And maybe it's okay to use paralytics because where is my use of use of paralyzing agents? Use of paralyzing agents is more if you are in the protective ventilation. People don't tolerate that very well. Okay, maybe I thought maybe it is not so bad to have use of paralytics and keep FiO2 as low as possible and so on and so forth. That was my conclusion from that study. Anybody has a different conclusion? Can tell me that. At the same time, somebody else was doing a study in 8 tertiary care Canadian hospitals, randomized controlled trial of 120 patients, again stopped because of futility. I'll tell you. ARDS, PO2 over FiO2 for inclusion in the study had to be less than 250, P with 5, and they didn't have pulmonary artery catheters, but they said no heart failure clinically. And then peak inspiratory pressure should not have been more than 30 for more than 2 hours before randomization, then you are out because they wanted to make sure. July 1995 to September 1996. But when this study came out, they talked about in this study about the other study. So I guess they were talking to each other and they were aware of each other's study done. Because this was in a Canadian hospital, they decided that they are going to do per kg ideal body weight because your actual body weight might be anything. And the reason they chose 10 to 15 tidal volume is that when they went back to the Brazilian study and they looked at actual body weights, they decided that 12 ml per kg actual body weight was somewhere around, in some people, up to 15 ml per kg ideal body weight. Okay? And after this, they said that, since hypercalcemia and acidosis is not that bad, if pH was less than 7, we'll use bicarbonate. Protective ventilation, tidal volume should be less than 8 ml per kg. Again, because that 6 ml per kg actual body weight, they thought that is going to be 8 ml per kg ideal body weight. Okay? Peak inspiratory pressure less than 30. Why not plateau pressure? Because they said, hey, we use volume control and who'll keep on checking plateau pressure? Plateau pressure has to be less than peak inspiratory pressure. So we'll keep the peak inspiratory pressure down and that will keep our plateau pressure. And they said, but if pH is less than 7, you could keep adding, volume at, to make it 30, 32 and all that stuff to a max of 40, which would give you a plateau pressure of 35, usually. Okay. And then after that, you just say permissive hypercapnia. And in these patients, they wanted to keep it less than 50. What did they achieve? They had a tidal volume of 5.6 to 8.4. Out here it goes 5.6 to 8 on day 7. The other guys had a tidal volume of 7.9 and 13.5. And at day 7, 7.3 to 12.9. That's a 95%. Plateau pressure 22.3, 26.3. 20, 28.6. Less than 30 in both arms. I calculated the driving pressure. 13.7, 18.6. PEEP almost equal 8, 7, 8, 8, 9, something like that. FiO2 less than 60. Respiratory rate, of course, low volume, higher respiratory rate, but look at that, 22, 23, minute ventilation around 11. No difference in barotrauma. The limited ventilation group received more paralytics. The duration of mechanical ventilation was much higher in the limited group. ICU day stays much higher in the limited group. Hospital stay much higher in the limited group. And look at deaths, no difference. And if anything, it was more in the limited ventilation group. What? What happened? What happened? Okay, don't worry. I'll tell you what happened. They had permissive hypercapnia. Okay. Arterial pH around 7.29, 6.99 to 7.3. Yes, the study was stopped and maybe the limited ventilation group were slightly sicker than the other group. There's something called oxygen index. I have the formula in mind. Don't completely understand it, but that was equal. Age was equal. More females in control group, more men do worse. Otherwise, they were same. This was a negative study. What happened? So from this study, my conclusion was that as long as the plateau pressure is less than 30 and driving pressure is less than 20, which it was in both arms, to me, looking at this photograph, there seems to be no difference between a tidal volume of 7 or a tidal volume of 10. Minute ventilation of 9 would keep your pH greater than 7.2. People with lower tidal volume need more paralysis. Peak needs to be higher than 5 in ARDS patients. I can conclude that. And respiratory rate low seems to help. So it failed because although their tidal volumes were different, the plateau pressures were safe plateau pressures. That's what I concluded from this study. And the other thing is, why are you measuring the plateau pressure? Why measure the plateau pressure? Because by limiting the tidal volume and limiting the driving pressure, you are limiting the plateau pressure because you think that the plateau pressure is alveolar pressure. If my plateau pressure is 35, that is my pressure in the alveoli. And that's all good, except you forget that transpulmonary pressure is actually alveolar pressure minus pleural pressure. And they said this, they came to the same conclusion. They said, maybe that is wrong, because you see, if I'm an obese person or have abdominal hypertension, or I have an abdominal binder, or I have ascites, or I have pleural effusion, then my pleural pressure, which is normally what? -3 to -5 is actually positive. And the plateau pressure of 35 might be too low. I might be at a lactatic, not too high, because it will be 35 minus, let's say, plus 10. So 35 minus 10, it's only 25, not enough distension. On the other hand, if you are giving me a tidal volume of 6 and my body says tidal volume of 8, then I am with volume control. Does not happen with pressure control, because with pressure control, you determine the flow, you determine the volume. I'll just give you the pressure, you do whatever you want with it. So they were using volume control, and therefore, if I am having a negative pressure of 20 because I don't like your vent settings and you have not paralyzed me, my alveolar pressure is 30 minus 20 is 50. Okay. So plateau pressure is equal to alveolar pressure if you look at your patient and they have no triggering, no trouble triggering, or no, because if you walk around the ICU, the reason that ARDS 60% of the time they are not getting tidal volumes less than 8 in the ICU, in ICUs, is because you might have this where the peak pressure and the plateau pressure is very low because the patient is trying to get them breath that you are not giving them what they need. And when you give them the proper volume, which is a higher volume than 6, they actually do better and you get a proper. Or for example, I see this all the time. 2 o'clock, you come to the ICU, you'll see this. That's why I keep my fellows in there. You have put a tidal volume of 400 and you are happy because I put a check mark, tidal volume 400, tidal volume 400. You go there and that person is double triggering, they are actually getting a tidal volume of 800 because they are not happy with 400. So you give them 500 and then they start double triggering and you're like, oh, but 500, that's so high. It's better than 800. Better than 800, okay? So as long as from that study, my conclusion was that as long as your plateau pressure and driving pressure are low, tidal volume does not matter. Maybe I'm the only person who thinks that, maybe not. Maybe not. Let's see. So the next study, they decided we are going to do a perfect study. 10 US university centers, again, March 1996 to March 1999, people talking to each other. Randomized control trial of H861 and the best mortality, total mortality, not 28-day mortality, not ICU mortality, but total mortality the world has seen up to date with ARDS. So what did they do? What did they do? So they said maybe we are going too high on this hypercapnia stuff. Maybe hypercapnia does have issues, okay? Increasing your pulmonary pressure, inflammation, increasing myocardial ischemia, this, that, and the other. And so we are going to go for a pH goal of 7.3. We are going to use a ventilator rate of 6 to 35, not more than 35 at electrono. Oxygen goal for the first time, they said maybe less is more. So let's do 55 by 80 as saturation 88 to 95%. We'll come. And peak FiO2, they said we'll do a table. Okay, and I remember that table because I had it by heart. And the table is 4532. Okay, so 45 and then plus 3 plus 2. So 45, 58, 60, 10, 70, 30, 80, 15. Okay, 90, 18, 120. Good. So that was their table. And until today, nobody has been able to beat that table with any of the ways that they have tried to do PEEP, including this inflection and all that. Tidal volume 6 ml per kg, predicted body weight, we'll learn how to do that, versus tidal volume 12. And everybody remembers 6 versus 12, 6 versus 12, but if the plateau pressure was greater than 30, they would reduce this tidal volume by 1 ml per kg time to get it less than 30, but they would not go less than 4. Why not? Less is more. Why wouldn't you go less than 4 tidal volume? Anybody? Because Gatinoni from Italy had already tried that out. Because he said, if you have ARDS, I'm going to totally rest your lung. I'm going to use a machine to get blood out of you, scrub the CO2 out, and so you won't have hypercapnia, and everybody gets less than 4, and that led to an increased mortality. Now, Gattinoni has done more studies in ventilator than anybody we know. And like Thomas Alva Edison, he knows 1,000 ways how not to ventilate. Okay, so that was like, he was like, no, don't go below 4. That's why, okay, don't go below 4. And if the plateau pressure, look at this, 7 in the details. If less than 25, they would increase, but they would not go above 6. Here, if the plateau pressure is greater than 50, you reduce. But if the plateau pressure is less than 55, you increase, but you don't go more than 12 ml per kg. So we need to remember this. If pH was less than 7.15 or tidal volume less than 4, you could increase. You forget the plateau pressure and you go back to 4 ml per kg. Here, if the pH was less than 7.15 or tidal volume less than 4, plateau pressure greater than 50 was allowed. And the most important thing, knowing that you have to look at the patient and you can have negative pleural pressure. If the patient has severe dyspnea, the dysynchrony that I showed, you could increase the tidal volume to 7 or even 8 ml per kg, provided that the plateau pressure is less than 30. Otherwise, you use paralytic. And this was a well-matched study. Everything is well-matched. PO2 over FiO2, 138, 134, well-matched study. Before the randomization, they were getting 676 and 665 tidal volumes, and that is the table that you can use. What did they find before I run out of time? So on day 1, the group 6 to 12, that's fine, but actually they received 4.4 to 8, and the other group is 10.2 to 13.4. There's a good separation. The separation on day 7 is less, 3.7 to 9.3 and 8.6 to 4.2. So I take this number and that number, and I say that 4 to 8.6 might be okay. I don't know. There was a separation. These guys had a plateau pressure less than 30, more than 30, less than 30, more than 30, less than 30, more than. Good. Respiratory rate higher than we have seen before in other studies. Minute ventilation higher than we have seen before in other studies. And the thing is, what permissive hypercapnia? Because look, they had normal. So they forgot hypercapnia completely. These are pretty normal pH values, and these are pretty normal PaCO2 values, maybe because the minute ventilation was higher than other studies. Okay. So, you go to Evo and you are having beer, and there is Olivia Masuta and Sangwan, like, we are a team, and suddenly Dr. Daniels comes and photobombs us, right? And then you're like, no, this is a team photo, so I'm going to use the pixel and I'm going to remove Daniels from the photo. People do that. But if you are going to say that I believe this, I believe this, I believe this from the study, then you also have to believe this. What does this show? Yes, if the more severe your ARDS, 6 or to 8.6 is better than 9 to whatever. Yes, but look at this. There is an indication that if your compliance is normal and you don't have ARDS or you have a mild form of it, then lower tidal volumes might actually be causing more mortality. So either we don't believe anything or we believe all 4. We can't take Daniels out of the picture. Okay, so what did I learn from this study? From this study, my conclusion was that in ARDS, tidal volumes of 4 to 8.6 ml per kg, ideal body weight, lower plateau pressures equal lower driving pressures and seem to save lives. In non-ARDS, we don't know. The driving pressure, again, I calculated the driving pressure. Okay, the driving pressure average 15.6. And here the driving pressure is 24.4, which takes me back to the first study. They wanted driving pressures less than 20 and plateau pressures less than 30. And even here, it seems to be working. And maybe 7.2 is too low, maybe 7.25. Minute ventilation of 10. Deep table works. Respiratory rate, I will still keep less than 30, but I won't exceed 35. That's what this study did. And there are times rules need to be broken, like pH of less than 7.15, or if the patient is having patient ventilator AC. Then there were more studies, more of the same 6 to 12, same results. Then came 3 studies, alveoli, lobes, and express. And what these guys said was that, okay, fine. Everybody at this time, 2004, tidal volume 6 ml per kg. Plateau pressure less than 30, I agree. Respiratory rate less than 35, I agree. pH 7.30 to 7.45, I agree. Okay. Volume assist control, except in the Lobes trial, they use pressure control. And everybody agrees oxygenation goal 55 to 80 and 88 to 90. What these guys wanted to study was PEEP. So the idea was that if PEEP opens up your alveoli and stops them from closing, then why don't I use maximal PEEP? Like, why don't I use a recruitment maneuver where I will put you on 40 of PEEP for 40 seconds or more, and then open up your lungs, and then I will start decreasing the PEEP, and I'll see your tidal volumes and your compliance. And when I find the best compliance, I'll go to a maximal PEEP, maximum open. Stopped because increased mortality, stopped because increased mortality. These guys were the only ones who continued till their whole, 30 hospitals, 1,000 patients, no change in mortality. Okay. And therefore, people started saying that maybe PEEP needs to be not low and not high, but just moderate. And they were comparing to the PEEP table, and the PEEP table won. Next time I'll tell you how I said. What was high versus low PEEP? They were also tables. And this one, you remember 30-10, and then 30-10, 40, 30, 15, 50, 16, 18, and so on, 60, 18, and so on and so forth. Okay, so 30-10, and then add plus 3 plus 2. Okay, a lot of PEEP. So people were like, maybe we should not use that much. So they did a systematic review, Java 2010, Brial et al. And what they did was they looked at all the papers and selected the ones without bias. And they said that in patients with ARDS, higher levels of PEEP will reduce mortality because it will keep you open and it will reduce the inflammation. But in contrast, if you don't have moderate to severe ARDS, you may actually experience harm from increased PEEP levels. And they showed that maybe the higher PEEP really works for people who have bad ARDS, less than 200, some people will say, PaO2 or FiO2 ratio of less than 1. In your boards and in my ICU, please do not do recruitment maneuvers. In your boards, definitely, recruitment maneuver is the wrong answer. They will give you that answer. They'll give you very hypoxic patient. They'll ask you to do recruitment maneuver. Don't select that answer. They did a meta-analysis, Cochrane database, 2021, it came out. High versus low positive end expiratory pressure levels for patients with acute lung injury and acute respiratory distress syndrome. They said we look at every study from the time the question was first asked, what should PEEP be, to May 2020. From those, I think it was 3,000 some studies, they selected 10 with 3,851 patients. The patients always had the same tidal volume, and it was just low PEEP versus high PEEP. No change in mortality, no change in vent days, no change in barotrauma. They said may improve oxygenation, but that was low certainty. It might improve your oxygenation, but you'll still die if you have to. It won't save your life. Then there was another paper. This one was 2022 American Journal. Same thing. Lung recruitment. We'll look at all the studies that did lung recruitment and high PEEP or PEEP according to compliance. Let's see what happens. From 3,927 studies on the subject, they selected 18 randomized controlled trials. So garbage in, garbage out. A systematic review is as good as the studies that are in it. 18 trials, 4,646 patients. They said In severe ARDS, you increase PEEP, you save lives, but do it without any recruitment maneuvers. Increase the PEEP, wait for a few hours, see what happens. By this time, people had realized that the low PEEP table is the best table in the world. Somehow it works because, you know, the oxygenation and the PEEP go together. And what was I going to say about that? Damn it, I forgot. Recruitment maneuvers. My train of thought went with and. Anyway, it'll come back. It'll come back. It'll come back. Okay,
APR.
we are running out of time. One of the problems I see in the ICU is estimating height instead of measuring it. Unless you are the guy in the Salisbury Fair or something that give, you know, you give him $1 and then if he gets your height and, you know, your age and your weight wrong, then he gives you 5, otherwise he keeps it all. Unless you are that man, there have been studies that it is absolutely inaccurate. And once I think in Tulane, I went and saw somebody on 250 tidal volume. I was like, what the hell is happening here? The guy had no legs. You have to ask them what was your height before your legs were taken off. Okay, let's do some estimation of the height. Give me a height. What's your height?
5'7".
5'7". So for a man, for the first 5 inches gets 50, and then 2.5. So 7 5s are 35, 7 to the 14, 15, 16, 17. So your weight is 67.5. If you are in ARDS, 6 5s are 30, 6 7s are 42, 45, 6 6 are 36, 405. But if you are in COPD, it will be more like 8. So 67.5 into 8, 8 5s are 40, 7 is a 56, 60, 8 6 are 54, 600. So your range is like, you know, what I do is that I would, if you are in ARDS, I would put you in pressure control, but I would put my alarm limits between 4 and 8. Okay, so that the alarm goes. Tell me one thing. In this study, what they did was that if you are on 6 ml per kg body weight, ideal body weight, tidal volume, and your plateau pressures were high, okay, what did they do? They decreased the tidal volume. If you are on pressure control ventilation, it does that automatically. Because I give you pressure control, for example, of 30 by 10, driving pressure of 20, plateau pressure of 30. If your compliance worsens, what will happen? Your tidal volume will go down automatically. If you are using volume control, you check the plateau pressure every half an hour, 1 hour, whatever, and then you have to adjust. So I am a lazy person. Pressure control is just more convenient. You can achieve the same things every way. Pressure control, I don't have to measure the tidal plateau pressure. And with pressure control, I don't have to keep decreasing the tidal volume. It does that automatically. And if it will be less than 4, my alarm will ring. Okay, no problem. So somebody actually, you know, the only consistent thing, even the first study, they said we did all of those things, but it seems that a little higher PEEP and low driving pressure were stuff. So the Amato in 2015, he looked at 9 randomized controlled trials. Again, I love systematic reviews, 3,562 patients. And what they said was that among ventilation variables, all the variables, driving pressure was the most strongly associated with survival, even in patients receiving protective tidal volume and plateau pressure. That means that if you had 6 ml per kg, but your driving pressure was 25, you do bad. If you have 8 ml per kg, but your driving pressure is less than 20, you do good. And PEEP and tidal volume were not independent variables. PEEP and tidal volume worked only when they worked to decrease driving pressure. Because if I give you PEEP and in return your compliance improves, then you'll get more tidal volume. So what will I do? I'll decrease the respiratory pressure, and so the driving pressure will decrease. Okay? And in the future of mechanical ventilation, Gattinoni again says that the measurement, right now, PEEP table works, but the measurement of lung recruitability should guide PEEP selection to optimize lung size and homogeneous inflation. Not hyperinflation, not underinflation. So For today's lecture and next lecture, I'll tell you how to actually do that. It seems from all the studies that the most important thing is to keep driving pressure less than 20, if possible less than 15, because the study with the best outcomes, the driving pressure was 15.4. Keep plateau pressure less than 35, if possible less than 30. Keep tidal volume less than 8, if possible, not as important as driving pressure and plateau pressure, but never less than 4, you'll kill somebody. Keep respiratory rate less than 35, if possible less than 30, I like low. Tolerate hypercapnia. Peak by load table, change the peak, see the effect, change the peak, see the effect. In the best mortality study, the peaks were 5 to 17. I have actually never exceeded 18 in my life. FiO2 less than 60% if possible. pH greater than 7.25 if possible. Prevent patient ventilator dysynchrony. This can only happen when you stop looking at EPIC and actually start looking at patients and ventilators. And for various reasons, pressure control ventilation might be the most convenient to use in ARDS patients because of its characteristics. And in the board and in my ICU, when I'm there, do not use lung recruitment maneuvers. They have not been shown to work. Okay.